you were talking about Graham Hancock dating the pyramids based on Archaeoastronomy. The problem with Hancock is there's two sides to it, and I think part of it is the academic's fault and part of it is Hancock's fault. Okay, I consider myself more of a computational archaeologist, and the problem with statistics is very easy to get conclusions that are what you want to find. You know, even if there's like 1 in 100 chances that he's correct, it's still worth investigating. You know?
What about 1 in 5,000? What about 1 in a million? Where do you draw your line with that then?
I am aware it is an odd paper and a potentially very controversial one, so don't pull any punches.
When I first read your paper, what was in my mind was, what if Robert has made the very error that he's highlighting in his paper at the beginning, a psychological error in interpreting data? So I went in deep looking to see if I could get you, but I couldn't.
We're right to write a critique about it.
People like sensation. Do you have something prepared?
I do have a presentation, yeah. I should also point out that I have edited the paper a bit since last time we chatted. Just, you know, because I've sent it off to antiquity, so I have to kind of cut down some words, but the essence is the same, so it shouldn't be much of a problem.
I've designed my questions to try and trip you up.
Oh, no, of course. Look, I am aware it is an odd paper and a potentially very controversial one, so don't pull any punches. Feel free to just kind of say what you think.
If somebody asks somebody to give an impartial opinion on something, the tendency is to go nice, but I don't think that helps the person asking the question.
I completely agree with you. No, so I have a colleague called Marco, who's a statistician, and he used to be known as the terror of like our department. Because anytime someone did a presentation, I presented like some graph or something, he would always put his hand up and go, you know, where's the standard deviation? Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? And everyone was like so afraid of him. And I kept putting graphs in specifically for him because I wanted him to be able to say, you know, you're doing it wrong. Because how am I going to do it better if he doesn't tell me I'm doing it wrong, right? So yeah. Does it make sense for me to share the whole screen? Because I can...
By all means, it just means you won't see me, but that's fine. You don't particularly need to.
No, I'm thinking more because if we go into more specific details, I've got like data opened up and code and stuff, so we can actually have a look at those if you want as well.
For sure.
Sounds good. Okay.
Super.
All righty. So today I'm talking about prehistoric McDonald's in Barcelona, which is a very odd concept. I completely understand. I should also say I'm Rob Barratt from Queen's University Belfast, and I do a lot of archaeoastronomy work, but the more I do it, the more skeptical I become about it. So I think I've been working on a paper recently where I put forward some of my concerns, potentially some points that I think need to be shared. And this presentation is kind of going through what that paper is going to look like to give you an idea of the research that I've been working on. And it does involve McDonald's in Barcelona, and we'll get to what that even means and why is it relevant for archaeoastronomy. But before we do that, I want to give a bit of an overview of like where I got to, how I got to this point.
Yeah.
So archaeoastronomy obviously is a subject that I'm sure you listeners will know about quite well, you know. And there's lots of different aspects to archaeoastronomy. It's, you know, you can think of it in terms of how people in the past viewed the stars and the sun and all these different aspects of it. You can think of it in terms of iconography. How do people represent all of these interests in the sky vault above? But one aspect of archaeoastronomy that I think is quite prevalent is the idea of alignments and alignment studies, which is the idea that if you go on an archaeological site and let's say you stand in the center of the archaeological site and you look through the entranceway of that archaeological site, you can see that an astronomical body passing through that entranceway. For example, well, recently for when we're recording, but maybe not so recently when it comes out, we had the winter solstice and people went to Stonehenge to view, you know, the sun rising in the distance. It's something that happens every year at a lot of different archaeological sites. And kind of the underlying principle in alignment studies is this idea that alignment with cosmological bodies is something that's really unusual, that's very rare, that doesn't happen coincidentally, right? And if it's not happening randomly, that suggests that it's an intentional thing. It's something that's happened because people in the past have intentionally built the sites to look to align to those astronomical bodies. And there is, some additional evidence that can help kind of support when you've got an alignment. For example, when I did some work in Malta, I went through the literature and I found these images that you can see here on the right, which have just, symbols on them that you could all see that could be the sun, or it could be, radius, it's images that kind of fit within a potential cosmological interest. But what happens when there's no additional evidence, right? How do we prove intentionality then? Do we rely solely on the alignment, or do we try to find other ways to do it? And the truth of it is a lot of time, and I don't want to generalize too much, but I have read a lot of papers in Archaeoastronomy, and kind of the conclusions people always come back to, it's not about the archaeological evidence so much, but it's kind of this sentence: if my site is so close aligned to the winter solstice, for example, this cannot be an accident, this must be intentional. Okay. And so it's kind of saying that all you need is an alignment. If an alignment exists, that proves that this site is important. Okay. But the problem is that I'm going to try and demonstrate here that it's actually much more common for a site to be significantly aligned to something than not. And I call this the Stonehenge paradox, right? It's the idea that any site, you can take any site in the world, and I guarantee you'll find an alignment to something at some point. Okay. It sounds crazy, right? I'm but just going to give you an example of the maths behind it, right? The idea, where the ideas come from, right? So when you think of an alignment in your head, maybe the first thing you think of is, there's 360 degrees in a circle, right? So your site has an orientation. It'll fit in one of these 360 degrees. Yeah. So the chance that you hit the orientation that is at the right angle to hit a certain cosmological body is 1 in 360, right? That's a reasonable way to put it. Yeah.
Yep.
And that works to about 0.2% chance that this is randomly. Yeah. So that's really low. If I told you there's a 0.2% chance that this is random, you say, well, it must be intentional. Yeah. The maths I'm going to be using now is quite generalized. It's just kind of trying to prove the point, but hopefully it kind of still holds up. So yeah, 1 in 360 chance is the chance of an alignment within 1 degree is correct. But let's say, for example, that there is some degree of error, right? Your orientation is never going to be 100% precise. Now, I did some experimentation that I published that says that you can kind of get a temple or whatever site you have orientated to about 2.5 degrees plus or minus 2.5 degrees of the ideal orientation. So the point is, that means that if you have an orientation that is, on degree 1, that will get an alignment, but also if it's on degree 2 or degree 3, degree 4, degree 5, that will still get that alignment, right? So your chances have dropped from 1 in 360 to 1 in 72, which is 1.4%. It's still very low that it's a random, but it's starting to go up, right?
Yeah.
Well, so let's add another variable in, right? So let's talk about entrances. So every site has an entrance, and if we're looking as traditionally alignments are done from the center of the site towards an entrance. Now, if it passes exactly in the center, you'll be happy, right? But if it passes a bit to the left or a bit to the right, you'd still be happy with that, right? Because it's still pretty good, right? And if, let's say, you've got an entrance which is about 6 degrees, because kind of I can think of a lot of archaeological sites that have kind of that span, right? If your odds were 1 in 72 before, your odds now become 1 in 12. So that's 8.3% chance that the site is going to hit something, okay? But then this is where the crazy part happens, right? Because the assumption here is that you're trying to hit a single thing, like the winter solstice, right? We're trying to hit the winter solstice, right? But let's say your site doesn't have an alignment to the winter solstice, it has it to the summer solstice. That's still cool. That's an interesting thing, right? Okay, what if it's the equinoxes, right? That's also interesting. And what if it's, the star Sirius? That's still interesting. Or the moon, Let's say you take like the two solstices and the 10 brightest stars, for example, right? That's 12 potential targets that you can hit. So the chances are not 1 in 12 anymore. They're 1 in 1, which is 100% chance of hitting something, right?
Wow, yeah.
So that's the thing. And again, the numbers here, obviously there's a bit of variation and stuff, but there's lots of other variables are not considered, stuff like precession, and there's a lot of other stuff that can add to this number.
Yeah.
So it just kind of shows that it may seem like it's a crazy thing that you get an alignment, but actually when you go down into numbers, is it that crazy? And there's two papers I talk about in my own paper that I criticize who do similar kind of things with maths, and they try to use statistics to demonstrate that astronomical alignments are important. Now, I do go quite heavily into these two papers, so I'm going to try to kind of simplify them here. I'm obviously quite critical of these papers. I should put out, I'm not the only one who has been critical of these papers. There have been other responses to it. So the first paper kind of look at is the decoding Göbekli Tepe with Archaeoastronomy.
I know this piece of work as well. Yeah.
So the fact that really made me think about this paper a lot was the absolute certainty with which the astronomical alignments are discussed. So there's a quote here that says, "Certainly no other interpretation has the level of statistical support described here." And the kind of the basis of the discussion, and we can go into more detail if you wish later on, but the idea is that you have these pillars at Göbekli Tepe which have specific animals on them, and you can align, and you can see those animals as representations of constellations. So what Sweatman and Socrates say is that the sequence of those constellations in the sky and the sequence of those animals match closely. The only way that could happen randomly is if for those animals to be exactly in that order that matches exactly the order of the constellations is 1 in 5 million. So obviously the point is it's so crazy it has to be intentional. The problem with it, and this is the problem I have with it, is that it has a really big assumption in it, which is that the two match, right? That what the animals are a direct comparison to the constellations. And the problem with that is that, maybe they do a bit, but not all of them are like absolutely certain, right? You got some of them here as an image, right? So you got the Scorpion image, and you got Scorpio, which is a constellation which is still recognized today. And, if people today see it as potentially the same, you can definitely see some similarities with it. Yeah. You got a bending bird, which looks like Pisces. Sure, could be. Libra looks like a duck goose. The more you kind of go down it, the more. So, the point is, the work is working on the assumption that those 12 must be linked, or you get the 1 in 5 million. The second you start to doubt even one of those matches, those numbers start going down. Okay, so that's the problem. That's where that maths is problem. And the statistics looks good. But it's based on assumptions which are just, are very questionable. Yeah. And that's kind of one of the issues I have with it. So I'll just go forward. And there's a circular argument going on here, because it's in the paper, they say that, we must consider the possibility that the symbols of pillar 43 were not intended to convey any specific meaning beyond depiction of common animals, which is, I think, very reasonable, right? It's a very reasonable response. They say, however, our basic statistical analysis indicates our astronomical interpretation is very likely to be correct. So they're using the interpretation as a basis for the statistical interpretation, but they're using the statistical interpretation to then provide the foundation for their interpretation of the animals, right? It's circular. There's no way out of that. So I have a big problem with this, and I can show you in a minute like how I can find not just similar kind of statistics. I can actually give you even better results than they have on something which we can clearly see is not astronomical. But before that, I want to talk about the second book that I kind of critiquing, which is Sirius, the Star of the Maltese Temples by Rejik. Now, I know a lot more about Sirius than Göbekli Tepe because my PhD was on Malta. And the problem with this book is that what they're trying to do is they're trying to claim that the temples in Malta were actually up to 5,000 years older than we think they are. At that point, they would be aligned to Sirius. And that's something that I think is a big problem. And I should also say that the Sweatman paper as well, they try to claim that the site is older because of alignments, regardless of the radiocarbon dating, which means the site is more recent, right?
Robert, can I just make the audience aware? You might have this guy's name in your next slide, but I do need to point out that your reference to Sweatman, and now you're on to the series. These are the fundamental interpretations that underlie Graham Hancock's theonomic. So everything, the Sirius temples in Malta, Göbekli Tepe. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that guy's name in case nobody recognized maybe Rejik or Sweatman.
No, it is a big name. One of the reasons why I came across Rejik is that Graham Hancock did a whole episode of Ancient Apocalypse on Sirius and the Maltese Temple.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
It was talking about
this book. And yeah, I mean, we can definitely talk about that more because I do have a lot of obviously opinions about that as well. So I would say also, like, I'm not one of the academics who kind of immediately rejects all of these ideas. I'll come to kind of this later on because I'm very critical obviously of these papers, but I don't want it to come across that I don't think they have any value altogether. But we'll talk about it in a minute.
What you are doing is adhering. I'm listening to every word you're saying, and what you've done, you're doing it masterfully, respectfully. Is what you're not doing is attacking them. You're attacking the theory.
No, but it's not just that. Of course, I don't want to attack. I'm not trying to do an an attack or anything like that. I think also something that's very important is that it doesn't come across. I think archaeological investigation or scientific investigation in general is a very valuable pursuit, even if it's a theory that has flaws. I think there is a value in investigating everything, right? When Graham Hancock says, there's a civilization that was it 24,000 years ago, there was a civilization. I can disagree with that, but I think it's a valuable thing to investigate. What I do disagree with is results, and especially the certain terms in which these are presented in these books. That's kind of what I critique more.
Yeah.
But I'll get to that in a second. So,
sure.
So part of the points, as I said, is in the Sirius one, there's not a lot of mass, there's not a lot of data, so it's very difficult to kind of understand. I don't doubt that the temples would be aligned to Sirius in the past, but I think the problem is the corroborating evidence. All of the examples that are given by Rejik are very weak. There's a lot of talking about how people in the prehistoric Malta has been kind of swept under the rug and all this kind of stuff, which there is maybe some arguments for in some cases, but I do think there is quite a well-known and solid chronology in Malta. There's a lot of radiocarbon dates for Malta, and the evidence that Rejik is suggesting pales in comparison to the evidence that the temples are actually 3,800 BC. I think that's kind of the issue.
Yeah.
So, but the point is, what if I'm wrong, right? I'm saying all these things, or criticizing all these people. It's easy for me to say, "Oh, you're wrong," right? Where's my proof of this, right? And the thing I want to kind of do is there's various ways to kind of test the theory, and there's one way which is called a reductio ad absurdum, which is to show to kind of take the theory to a ridiculous extent to show that it can't be true. Okay.
Yep.
So what I want to do was to use what's called a neutral data set. So all of these sites we don't know. They could have been used for astronomy. They could have been used not for astronomy. We don't know for certain. But there are some sites that we know for certain that they weren't used for archaeoastronomy, right? So the logic is that if a site that clearly has no astronomical interest still registers significant astronomical alignments, right, that should make us question all astronomical alignments. Because if it's such a rare event as it's being suggested, it shouldn't happen. You shouldn't have that many random alignments.
Sure.
So enter McDonald's.
I love it.
So here it is.
It's so cheeky coming from a guy like you, isn't it? Just dropping a dirt bomb into the academic community.
It really is, you know. I love research that starts from a silly principle that really makes you think, there's a...
But it's so accessible, it's so eye-catching. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah. I don't want to say, one of my favorite papers is a paper called the Silurian hypothesis. We don't have to go into detail, but it talks about how dinosaurs went to Mars. And the main thing,
just a fantastic.
Yeah. And it's a great paper. It's not a bad paper at all. It's a paper about Anthropocene and about how humans impact environment. And if we have impacted the environment enough that in the future people would know about. Anyway, it's an aside, which I would recommend looking into if you want to. But
yeah, I've written it down.
Okay, but McDonald's in Barcelona. So the thing about McDonald's is that they're definitely not astronomical. I think we can all agree they're not astronomical. I have tried to contact McDonald's to confirm this, but they haven't responded. But I think we can all agree, right, that McDonald's purpose is not an astronomical laboratory. It's nothing like that. It's just a fast food chain, right? So I take, I believe it's 28 McDonald's from Barcelona, because that's all the McDonald's in Barcelona. I didn't cherry pick them. I just picked everyone I could find. And the reason why I picked McDonald's Barcelona specifically was partly because it's on a grid. So there's a chance of a confounding variable, which is something that can impact a lot of astronomical alignment studies. I actually don't think it ended up playing a role in the statistics, but we can get into that if we need to. Mm-hmm. But I got 28 McDonald's. So what I did was I had a piece of software that I've written which calculates astronomical alignments. So I run it through the software to see what the alignments look like. And this is what I get. Okay. Now, I know this just looks like a load of data, but every time there's a red number there, it means that that particular site is significantly aligned at that year. Okay. So you can see here that, for example, for Beta Crux, you have all of these different McDonald's, and throughout between 3000 BC and 1000 BC, they have very strong, significant alignments to Beta Crux. And I found the same to Rigo Kent, to Rigo, Beta Crux, Alpha Crux, and Beta Centauri. So all of these stars have very strong alignments to all of these sites, specifically in 3000 BC, but also, in other periods as well. And the interesting thing here is that a lot of times if people try to avoid alignments in a specific site, what they'll also try and talk about is patterns of alignment. So it's not just, in Malta, you don't just go, well, this one site is aligned. You say all of the temples tend to be aligned to this thing, right? So it shows that even when you're looking at patterns throughout different sites, you can still have significant confirmations of alignments, even when they shouldn't be. So this is comparable to research I did in Malta, where I found that it had alignments with Beta Crux, Alpha Crux as well. And you can see that with similar number of sites, you have, to be honest, even more sites aligned in McDonald's than in Malta. So the data set of McDonald's is actually has stronger alignments than my data set in Malta, which already had strong alignments. And you can calculate the chances of this happening randomly, just like Sweatman and Sikirikis did. And it comes out at 1 in 18 trillion chances. So the McDonald's in Barcelona in 3000 BC are intentionally aligned because there's only 1 in 18 trillion chances that they are randomly aligned. Okay. Which is crazy. It's obviously, the point of it is, obviously I don't believe that McDonald's and Barcelona are aligned to anything, right? But it does show that statistics don't mean anything unless they have the proper context, and context is vital, right? Something else that I've done, which I think is also quite important, is looking at iconography. So a lot of these studies kind of say, all right, if you don't believe the alignment, let's look at the archaeological evidence. Let's see if there's any evidence of astronomical interest in this society. And so let's think about McDonald's, right? What iconography of astronomical interest is there, right? Well, the Big Mac circular, right? Unlike Wendy's, where it's square. So, a circular obviously represents the sun. In a lot of iconography, in a lot of advertisements, you've got the lettuce radiating out of the bun,
Yeah.
That's obviously the sun, the rays of the sun coming out of it, right? The halo. The McDonald's arches, I mean, that's obviously the rising and the setting of stars and sun, right? That's going up and going down. It's almost got the kind of analemma thing as well going. And also there's, I heard you talk with Maggie about numerology. Is it numerology? Is that the word of it as well?
With who, sorry?
Was it, what's his name? Giulio Magli, is that his name?
Oh, yeah, Giulio Magli, that's right. That was my
Yeah.
very first episode, and that was intentionality versus chance in archaeoastronomy.
Yes. So you talk about, the power of numbers there and how people sometimes see numbers as being things. So I kind of wanted to find an example of that. And I found that, we got 6 nuggets. That's the standard portion. And that represents the 6 dimensions in a lot of traditional talk systems, And to kind of top it all off, there's this lovely image here of the Hamburglar, which I think we can all agree looks exactly like the constellation of Cancer. And therefore, just like the Sweatman and Sakriki's paper, that must be true because the statistics are so certain. We got 1 in 14 or whatever, 18 trillion chances that the Hamburglar must have been created to represent the crux. And so I want to conclude this though before we kind of go into the question part of it. I mean, the thing about it, I feel like I've become the Grinch of archaeoastronomy, right? Saying that everyone's wrong. And I want to point out that that's not what I'm saying at all. I don't want people to walk away from this thinking archaeoastronomy is a lie. It doesn't exist. It's all fake. That's not what the conclusion is here at all. Because people in the past clearly had an interest in astronomy. We've got plenty of examples of this happening, right? And undoubtedly it happened, even in prehistory where we don't have written records and the iconography can be misinterpreted. I'm sure there was an interest in astronomy. The problem I have is with statistical methods, and it's the hiding of the limitations, the assumptions, the errors. All of these elements really undermine a lot of studies. And I think there is a value, not just in archaeoastronomy, not just in, these studies, in archaeology in general. I think there's a push to try and always be certain about things and always try and be, try to say, I know for certain this is what happened. And the truth is, the field we're in, we have very limited evidence a lot of the time. So anything we say is always going to be a speculation. And sometimes speculation can be well supported, but most of the time the speculation is going to be very speculative, as it is. And I think saying, I've got 1 in 5 million alignment and therefore this has to be true is very, I don't think it's malicious necessarily, but I do think it's disingenuous. I think there's complete value in saying, I think a lot of studies should focus on saying, hey, look, we found that, out of all the possible alignments, we ruled all of these out. The only one that remains is the winter solstice. So it's possible that we'll witness the winter solstice. And it's possible, that's the key part. It's not certain. Even if you've got like the most perfect of alignments, it's a possibility, which is worth exploring, worth looking into. Even the studies by the ones we've been looking at today, those are still absolutely valid investigations. Is the conclusions that need to be a lot more conservative and a lot more careful. And that's where I kind of have issues with them. So that's the presentation. I'm gonna stop sharing for now. There you go. Then I can get to see your face.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
It's okay. So I'm going to go right back to the start, and I'm going to ask you something that was in my mind after you did your first slide, and it's this.
Yes.
These erroneously interpreted datas,
Mhm.
do you also do you also consider that those errors may be extrapolated and taken from large data sets out with archaeoastronomy, for example, in trial drugs, new foods? Because what you're talking about is a psychological error in interpreting data, isn't it?
I mean, this is the thing. Statistics is something that is it's in every field, right? It's not just astronomy.
Yeah.
It's archaeology. It's every single field. And the problem with statistics is very easy to lie in statistics, but also unintentionally lie. I'm not saying these people are intentionally presenting false information. It's just very easy to get conclusions that are what you want to find. There's plenty of better researchers than me who have shown in lots of different fields how statistics can be utilized badly. I think there's a book called Bad Science, I believe, which has plenty of examples of it. And yeah, I think it's a problem. I do like archaeoastronomy. I think I consider myself more of a computational archaeologist. So I kind of am interested in wider archaeology in general. And whenever there's a study that uses any kinds of statistic, I'm always a bit like, oh, I need to be very careful here. Yeah. And I don't want this to come across as, everyone's wrong, I'm right. This is not the way at all. But
it might be. Might all be. You might be the guy.
No, absolutely not. This is the thing, right? I'm not a statistician. I went straight to archaeology. It's something I'm interested in, but I can't claim to know all about statistics. And the thing is, like, I look at my own previous research and I do see issues with it. And I've always tried to be very conservative in my results, very clear about my assumptions, my limitations. But I'm sure, anyone can take my papers and pick them apart just like I'm doing, right? And you're welcome to. And that's part of science. That should be what we do. And there's a lot of things that kind of, like, I think a lot of the skepticism has come from my own research. Like, I remember when I was doing my master's, I published a paper looking at winter alignments in the sites of Gigantea, for example.
Sure.
And later research has shown that I've done myself has shown that the data was just wrong. There's just nothing. There isn't an alignment, right? I made more robust methodologies later on have shown that that's the case. And it's because I was using statistics it wasn't statistics, it was more just astronomical calculations without really understanding them so well, right? And even stuff I did for like my master's, I recently had a chapter in a book about Balinahati. There's like the results I have there, I think are really interesting. But even then, I'm pretty sure somebody will be able to find some errors. It's not quite as well presented. And there's other stuff as well. So I know, for example, that because there's something that I try to think of, like, specific examples of things that I know that I do, which are a bit like, oh, I'm not sure that's the correct thing. One example is to do with the way my software calculates astronomical alignments. Actually, I can show you something if I may. I'm just going to share my screen.
Please do.
So the software I use is called Tarshan Core, which is something that I've written myself. That's the code there. But the results kind of come up as the way they kind of process them. Trying to think of the best way to explain this. Basically, when it comes to the end product, I tend to have these kind of tables here. This is the best way I found to present my data. Sure. And you may see there's 3 different ones here. There's average, start, and end, which is the alignment that happens. It's showing the precision of the alignment when the alignment starts, so the midpoint, so the point of when the star is rising, for example, right? What's the alignment then? The end is when it's leaving that entrance way, right? So if it's gone too high, and it's just gone off the you can't see it anymore. That's the end point. And the average is kind of the midpoint between those two. And for various reasons, the average is the one that always looks best. If you look at the data here, like Regal Kent, for example, right? This is all red. This has some red in it, but it doesn't look quite as nice. The end one is terrible, right? So I always use the average because it looks better as data and it kind of proves my point a lot more. But is that inherently better than doing the start? Is it entirely better than the end? Probably not, right? It just depends on how you interpret it. And I try to put it, whenever I do this in a serious paper, I do try to say, I'm doing the average. So bear not him, the average. But I'm twisting the data slightly to prove my point a bit more. And that sometimes could be good, but maybe what I'm getting is actually bad results. And that's kind of doing it.
When I first read your paper, what was in my mind was, what if Robert has made the very error that he's highlighting in his paper at the beginning? And let's just imagine there's a 32-year-old head of design in Los Angeles who signs off the designs for all new McDonald's. What if that person was a Hancock fan and every damn one of them was aligned to Sirius? So I went in deep looking to see if I could get you, but I couldn't. I couldn't find anything to suggest that McDonald's were aligned archaeoastronomically.
Wow, okay. But that's absolutely the point, right? Look, the thing about it is like the data set that I'm presenting, if you start pulling it apart, it will fall apart because obviously 1 in 13, it doesn't make any sense, right? The point of that is that there's error propagation, there is a lot of confounding variables, there is a lot of uncertainty, and all of that is compiling to get those numbers. So I am intentionally in a way, I am kind of intentionally obfuscating some things there to get the results I want. I'm kind of doing it in a way. But that's kind of proving the point. What I tried to do is do it in the same way that somebody did an astronomical alignment study would do. But if you did find that the Barcelona and McDonald's were built for astronomical alignments, that does invalidate my whole research. So anyone's welcome to. If anybody finds it, absolutely. And that's good. If I get proven wrong, fantastic. Let's move on. Let's try something else. That's how science works,
Yeah, because I saw when I read you finish your paper, I thought, wow, I hope he's tested all this against his own data set, his own trial set, but
as I said, I think, I have tried to contact McDonald's. I sent them 3 different emails to different people. Wonderful. None of them have got back to me. I did manage to get them on Twitter. They said, I said, I need to ask you a question. And they said, yes, ask ahead. And I asked the question and they ignored me. So I'm putting out a call out there. If anyone at McDonald's wants to get in contact with me about this, please. It's not showing McDonald's in a bad light at all.
I would have blocked you. You'd come on and ask me that. So considering everything you're proposing, have you got anywhere in your mind that you see how such erroneous interpretations really affect archaeoastronomy today? Do you think it's perhaps within the amount of winter solstice alignments, or is it equinox? Can you see anywhere that this is toxifying archaeoastronomy?
I think there's quite a few different areas. I think there's a lot of harmless stuff, like people going to an archaeological site for winter solstice. Fine, have fun. I'm not there to ruin a lot of people. I think there are some elements that I think can be an issue. I think there's a lot of something I do have a lot of gripe with is people calling sites laboratories or astronomical laboratories. Because I think that is quite a big leap of interpretation and it can obfuscate the use of a site. And the example I can come up with this is that the point is this, like, I have obviously an interest in astronomy. I have lots of books about astronomy. Does that make my office a laboratory of astronomy? Does it? Not really,
Robert. It's almost like a YouTube title suggestion. A laboratory, such a modern term shoved into the past. And I get it that laboratory is somewhere that trials and tests are done. But you wouldn't know.
Is it an observatory? That's the kind of thing that those are the terms that people use. And I think, I think it's Menage or I think it's Menage or Kim, which is often called an observatory. And I'm like, yes, there is like a clear equinox alignment at that site, but there's nothing else there to suggest that they're interested in it. Like,
That's really interesting.
like Maltese culture, for example. I know a lot about Maltese, and I'm sure this applies to other cultures as well. Is a varied culture. There's a lot of really interesting things there. And maybe they did have an interest in astronomy, but did they have such an interest that it would be the main thing they think about? No. So when I see, like, in the Times of Malta, people talking about sun worshippers and this kind of stuff, it's really presenting a false narrative in a sense. And I think again, it has like repercussions for wider archaeology, and that's what gets me at the end of the day. It's if we are misusing statistics or misunderstanding statistics in archaeoastronomy, we're doing it in other areas of archaeology. And especially, because we know archaeology does have potential ties to nationalism. There is lots of political motivated archaeology. We do need to hold ourselves to a good standard. And I think it has to be like everything matters, every little thing matters, So I think we can't just go, oh, yeah. You believe that the winter solstice is important to decide. Yeah, that doesn't matter. But then it's very easy to kind of go bigger and bigger and kind of enter bad patterns of research,
Oh, for sure. Would you agree or argue this, that like I see there's just endless variables from visual restrictions to the tools that you can use, how those degrees of error extrapolate further the longer over the greater distance of measurements taken. But I think what I never see mentioned in archaeoastronomy papers, and I know here living in Colombia that it has an enormous effect, is just ground movement over 5,000 years, earthquakes, tremors. I mean, you could be talking about a site, Stonehenge even, have been oriented maybe even 15 degrees off, is the case in the Andes, where whole mountains twist. You know?
But this is the thing. Like, the problem is, like, it doesn't have to be 15 degrees, right? The problem is, there's a lot of variables, right? This is the part that people forget, right? Because you can be like, oh, look, I did some measurements. They were, an accuracy of a few degrees. That's pretty good, right? That's fine. But a few degrees here, plus a few degrees when you're doing when you're running your code, that's a few degrees off. And then, this other variable, that's a few degrees off, and that's a few degrees off. It's called error propagation. So small problems get bigger and bigger and bigger the more steps there are. And that's the problem, like there's all these.
Have you ever heard people saying that people say on top of what you've just said, they'll say yes, but over the course of an experiment, all of the variables iron themselves out? I've heard that a few times, meaning, so we just assume a degree. It's like, oh, no.
But that's the thing. In science, you don't just assume they iron themselves out, because they can iron themselves out or they can compound. But either way, when you get to your end result, there is going to be what we call a standard deviation. There is going to be an element of error that you need to account for, right? And that's the point. And the point is, like, if I say, this alignment is, I'm just going to give it a number. I know it doesn't make any sense, but let's say this alignment is a 5, whatever, right? With a standard deviation of 1. Now, it could mean that is objectively a 5. So it is precise as we think it is, right? And therefore it is correct. And that's not a problem. But with that 1 degree of standard deviation, it could be a 4. It could be a 6. Those are still potentially valuable things. So yeah, maybe it irons out and it does end up being a 5. But you also have to count the possibility that maybe it hasn't ironed out and it is a 4, it is a 6, And if your standard deviation is much larger than you think it is, and if you're not even prepared to even try to estimate what that standard deviation is, how can you trust the results,
Yeah.
That's kind of bad. And that's it.
Returning to Malta, after the last episode we recorded, you got a really scathing criticism from one researcher who pointed out that not only did you overlook the Hancock-Sirius connection, but you also overlooked the fact the temples were built by giants. Did you know that? That you didn't know that?
I mean, I knew Gigantia, the name Gigantia actually does come, it means giant's tower. So there you go. It does. There is a connection. Yeah. Yeah. I think I should say, I think the Hancock thing is very interesting. and Sweatman as part of it, obviously, because of the whole Younger Dryas thing. But I've talked a lot about Hancock in the department because there's various people. There's at least a PhD student working on Hancock's theories, and he is. My understanding of it, he's kind of on the fence about it, which is really interesting, I think. And we've had good conversations about it, and I'm very two-minded about it because I very much think,
Really?
yeah. I mean, this is going to sound really confusing coming from what I just said up to now, of course. But I think the problem with Hancock is there's two sides to it, and I think part of it is the academic's fault and part of it is Hancock's fault. Okay, and I think both of the sides are to blame in some way. I think, in a sense, I do see where he's coming from in that academia is quite a closed community, and that it's not very open to outside ideas. And this is not just archaeology; this is science in general, I think. And
a pretentiousness.
There's a pretentiousness, and I think that is. It's undoubtedly true. And I think there's an unwillingness to think outside the box. And I think that is very much a detriment to science in general. If we think of, for example, tectonic plates, right? Tectonic plates, I don't know if you know much about the history of tectonic plates, but so there's a theory that was originally put forward. I'm going to forget his name now. All right, the person who put it forward was a meteorologist. He wasn't a geographer or geologist. And because of this, he was very much laughed out of like all the conferences, and nobody took him seriously. And everyone went, no, it's a stupid theory. We've got much better theory. And it took about 60 years before the theory was accepted, by which point he was dead. Do you have his name? Have you Googled his name?
I was Googling there. I can't find it, but I've come back onto you now. I'm not going to distract with that.
No, that's okay. So the point is, just because he was not part of that academic circle, he wasn't taken seriously. And that is dangerous. I'm very much, I like a lot about the history of science, and I read off like Feyerabend, talking about everything goes is his theory. And it's the idea that ideas come from everywhere, and you shouldn't limit yourself where those ideas come from. So when Graham Hancock comes in and he says, there's a civilization 20,000 years ago that's been wiped away, or, all of these different theories, not so much the alien parts, but, the more down to earth ones that he has, right? And people immediately reject it. I do think that is a shame, because I think, even if there's like 1 in 100 chances that he's correct, it's still worth investigating.
What about 1 in 5,000? What about 1 in a million? Where would you draw your line with that then?
I genuinely think that there is no theory that shouldn't be investigated. I don't think you should throw a lot of money to it. That's a different point, right? I mean, if you're applying for funding, that's a different question, right? But as a principle, I don't think it's an immediate no, right? I think the issue, though, on the other side is that once you have been given a chance to investigate a theory, there is a set of rules you do need to play by. We have a solid method. We have we publish papers. We got peer review process, and sometimes papers don't make it through the peer review, and sometimes they do, and sometimes there's responses to papers.
Yeah.
This is why I said, I don't think Sweatman's papers or Reject papers or anyone's papers shouldn't exist. I think that is a completely valid piece of work that is still fine to criticize and tear apart, but it should still be allowed to be said. You know what I mean?
So who's allowed to say? Should everybody that's a non-academic be allowed to publish and say?
I think it is an idiot, right? I'm not saying it's a problem. I completely get it, because it is in an ideal world, a bad theory will eventually die, is the thing in the community. If you don't get enough traction, the theory will pass away. But I do see your point. If everyone suddenly started publishing papers, where do you draw the line? I think when you first publish his first book, fine, that's okay. And then, the problem I think is that there's been a lot of responses already, right?
Yeah.
Lots of academics have rescued a lot of things. There was a lot of criticism of many of these methodologies. And there comes a point where you just have to, if you're Graham Hancock, and you're listening to this podcast, it's time to kind of move on. That's the point, right? You've got a theory. If the theory is not accepted and the whole scientific community is against you, then it maybe is time to think that maybe the theory isn't correct. It wasn't wrong to put the theory forward, but there comes a point where, you just go, again, I don't want it to come across as we're snobbish and we can't accept anyone to come up with other ideas. I think there is validity to that. I just think that, you say your thing, you test it out, and if you test it out and if you find evidence for it, fantastic, that's great. You thought outside the box, you got it. If the evidence is not great, or suddenly you've got like 10 different people writing bad reviews about you and, responses and that kind of stuff, then maybe that's the point where you start going, oh, okay, maybe that theory didn't pan out. Let's look at something else. Let's try something else,
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So again, I'm definitely not a Graham Hancock fan. I don't think that. I think a lot of his work is problematic in many ways. I still think that there are some redeemable qualities to all of these papers I criticize, and I have criticized them quite heavily.
He's actually a really human, decent fellow. If you met him in a pub for a pint, you wouldn't be running home. You'd be getting a crack. Really.
But this is it, and the point is, like, there may be points that it's very easy to kind of take someone and just go, that's a bad scientist, ignore everything that person says.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you're potentially limiting what you can get out of it. And, it's not a good attitude to have in science, I think. And I think it is worth listening to everything. And then again, absolutely, you can criticize it. You were right to write a critique about it, and as he was right to correct you if there was something wrong with it. It's a discourse. Science is a discourse. Everything we say today, 200 years from now, people are going to laugh at how ridiculous we sound and how stupid everything we're saying is. But the only reason they can do that is because we are saying that today. The only reason why we have, I wouldn't say the only reason, but like we probably have a better understanding of Göbekli Tepe because we've had to respond to Graham Hancock. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we've put more effort into trying to improve our chronology, our understanding of it, because we're trying to respond to that work. And it's still made science progress.
Yep.
It doesn't matter that it's wrong.
Yep.
It's still important that it's there. Or I'm going to get a lot in trouble for this. Between the article and this interview, I feel like I'm going to have everyone against me, but that's fine.
No, I don't think you will.
The other thing that I've not really talked about, but I think is really important, and it's something that I definitely wanted to bring up today, is I have a real issue with dating archaeological sites based on archaeoastronomy. This is something that I do kind of have a strong disagreement with, because it's something that we've seen in some of the articles that I've talked about, but you were talking about Graham Hancock dating the pyramids based on archaeoastronomy. That's kind of what made me think of it. But the problem with this is that it's always pitted against stuff like radiocarbon dating, which is a method which, is within a certain degree of error, but it's a method that is very robust. It's been experimented with a lot.
Yeah.
We have a very good understanding of radiocarbon dating. So we got like a lot of like really robust methodologies that give us really precise, relatively precise dates. So coming along and saying, oh, but this site would have been aligned in this year just doesn't make sense, because again, by that logic, the McDonalds are 5,000 years ago, because that's when they would be at the peak alignment. It's exactly the same logic, right? If we're looking at when something would be aligned to something, it means nothing, because there's it's all to do with precession, right? The stars move around in the sky. Eventually, not all stars will eventually align to a site, but let's say you're taking Sirius, there's a good chance that at some point in history there would have been an alignment. Now that doesn't mean that it would have been built there at that point. It's just what it is.
Have you heard of Ian Hinton? Does that name ring a bell?
I don't think so.
Oh, he's just, if you go after this, if you go back and look at the podcast schedule, you'll see Ian Hinton. Listen to him, interviewing him again in 2 weeks. Ian spent the last 20 years as a researcher. He looked at the Romanic myth, and it was that since 0 to about the 18th century, Christian church builders and cathedral builders in the UK aligned the church to the sunrise on the horizon of the day of the dedicated saint. So he, with his wife, went out and personally surveyed 3,000 English churches and cathedrals over 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And went through his paper with me. And what he showed was all the research leading up to him. There was famously 2 Italians who selected 12 churches and showed that they were accurate to the day of the dedicated saint within fractions of a degree. 12 churches in their data set published in the paper. Ian showed that when you surveyed them all, the variance was incalculable, as in there were some of them were at 27 degrees from north, beyond where the sun rises, and some of them were at 90. And what he concluded, the only conclusion one could make is that those church designers aligned east, following canonical direction. Jesus will return from the east. So he broke down everything, hundreds of years of a cultural myth saying they've dedicated saint. And while some of the selected data set definitely are, when you look at them all, they 100%, 99% aren't.
Yeah. So this is something that I call like confounding variables, is what this is called, right? And it's something that I found like in Malta, for example. So I think we talked a bit before
the selection effect.
Yeah, it's partly that, but it's not just about selection, right? But it's also this idea that variables could impact results. So in Malta, for example, we've talked vaguely now and in past about the research I did there, where I concluded that there was, if there was a significant alignment to any astronomical body, it would be to the crux, right?
Sure.
Yeah, good alignment to the crux. But something that I do point out in my paper, because again, it's something I've always been aware of, is the possibility that confounding variables may potentially really change those numbers. So what I was trying to say is, in Malta, the orientation of temples are all towards the southeast, pretty much without a fail. And there's studies from the 80s by Adjus and Ventura which show that statistically this shows that they're intentionally orientated towards that direction. Not towards a star, not towards anything, but towards that direction.
A direction, yeah.
And the point is, I looked into it and I thought, what if they're aligning it downwind or towards the winter sun because it's warmer, right? They're not interested in the sun rising, the solstice. They want just the warmth of the sun, right?
Totally.
Because then you're then kind of narrowing it down. Let's say that the wind is a bit trickier, but let's say the wind only comes from one quadrant of that 360. That's and it so happened in Malta to be in the southeast. If you orient all your temples to the southeast because you're doing it downwind, they're all going to have that orientation, and that comes up as statistically significant. It doesn't have to be astronomical, right? And then because you're limiting kind of that field of view, then it's more likely to hit the same thing over and over again, right? So it's more alignment with crux. So it's this confining variable thing. Are you saying the churches, because they're all pointing towards the rising sun vaguely, towards that east, they're gonna have all those alignments. It's all gonna be it's a confining variable. It is intentional. They are all those churches are intentionally put in that direction. But if it because of the same, they know it's not correlated between the two. It's just a random.
Totally. Therefore, the churches aren't really, those 12 might be accurate to 1 degree, but the church building set over several centuries is only accurate to 90 degrees. It was a 90-degree accuracy that was falling in as long as it was east.
Yeah. But if you're considering it as a 360 possibility, that still looks intentional. Because it is. It is intentional. It's just not, it's not very significant, is the point.
And I did an experiment 10 years ago where I posted on Facebook. I discovered 5 sites spanning Europe and North America, 5 sites that when you plot them, apparently look the shape of a pentagram in different nations, different continents. Now, when I made the dots on the map big enough, that looked like a pentagram. So I posted it and said, question mark, what do these sites all have in common? I got amazing stuff. I got ancient civilizations, Graham Hancock. These are major stations for the lost technologies, UFO landing bases, ley lines, energetics going around the globe. And when I published what they were, I lost so many friends. You know what they were? They were Disney Worlds. Disney
Yeah,
Worlds.
yeah. There's a similar, and this is partly why I did the McDonald's in Barcelona. I was inspired by, there's a mathematician comedian called Matt Parker. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
No, but I love the sound of that.
He's written a book called Humble Pie, which I would thoroughly recommend. If you're like me, interested in, being a bit more skeptical about stuff, understanding how maps can be really interesting. So he did a very similar approach where he found lots and lots of ley lines from different sites, but they were all Woolworth locations. That's what they were.
I had to as well. Yeah.
So it's exactly the same way you were doing.
If I show you a 1 in 25,000 map of Scotland, and so the map represents, say, 50 miles squared, I could show you alignments between cairns and brochs and castles, and even say they were all built within the same century, showing a passing of knowledge. You can show artifacts as you did at the start. But when you zoom into that map, it looks like a fractured zigzag. It's because the resolution's pulled back. It looks like it's an alignment, but that line might represent 15 miles on the ground.
And we're going full circle because this is the problem. We got so much data now that you can find patterns everywhere. When I did my astronomical alignment studies, I literally end up with, I would imagine, I don't even know how much it would be, but probably at least tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of alignments. They just kind of, at this point in time, there would be this alignment. There's so much data there that if you just twist it in one way or turn it in the other way, you're going to find something. Something's going to come out of it, especially if you're expecting to find something. If I go into it, and it's the same thing as that, Sweatman paper, if you're going into it expecting to see constellations,
Yep.
And you look at these animals and you go, well, in this sequence next, there should be, this is the constellation of Cancer. Does that look like a crab? Chances are you're going to see a crab,
Yeah.
Because that's what you're expecting to see. And the point is, it's fine. Assumptions exist in science for a reason. That's not a problem, but you just have to be open and admit to it, And you can't say my results are definite. That's the part. That is the one part that really stuck with me with that paper, is that the absolute certainty that it has to be true. If that paper had said all it said, and then we got to
here's the weaknesses.
Yeah, or even if it had just said, this is a really interesting idea, it doesn't quite gel with the radiocarbon dating, but if more evidence comes up, then we'll reopen the investigation, Absolutely fine. It would not be in my paper at all. I would not be talking about it here because that's fine. That's how science works, It's the certainty of it that really gets to me.
A scientist would never say this is 100% right. Never mind 2.5 million in one chance of being wrong.
So this was the thing. No, but it's something that I think is very important, is that I think just as you can look at these papers and go, this is bad science, bad example, whatever. I think it is something that is done a lot in just traditional archaeology, traditional science. The fact that, again, I've seen a lot of papers that, have good data, good results, and then go, well, this has to be the conclusion. And because, again, it's quite robust methodology, they get away with it. But I do think that, I think it's just a problem in academia, because in academia, if I were to publish a paper saying, here is a suggestion, my data is okay, but here is a million potential things that are wrong with it. The first thing they're going to say is,
what's wrong with it?
Yeah, they're not going to take it for granted.
Yeah.
It's a bit like advertising, in the sense we still need to pretend that our work is the best possible, right? And it's kind of like something when I was writing my thesis, my PhD thesis, I struggle with this quite a bit, because I kept, my first draft was very much, here's some data, we can't really draw any conclusions, that is it, right? And my supervisors kept saying, no, it's an archaeology dissertation, you have to draw some conclusions from. And I'm like, but we don't know. So in the end, it kind of, I tried to include like a whole section, multiple sections where I said, these are the limitations.
Possible conclusions.
And whenever I talk about conclusions, I always try to say, hey, with these assumptions in mind, and again, if these assumptions are wrong, ignore everything I'm about to say. Everything else, these are what the conclusions would be. And I tried to be clear with that, but I'm not a saint. I'm sure I do this wrong as well. I'm sure you can criticize me for it. I mean, I'm not trying to pretend that I'm perfect in any way, but I do think it's something that we do struggle just in archaeology in general. Just being able to admit that you don't know everything and that your work has assumptions, potential errors, potential problems that may invalidate it. But that's just the nature of it. And it doesn't make your research any worse. This is the thing. I think people are just scared. They're scared that somebody's going to come along 2 years from now and go, that paper you wrote, it's all wrong, But there should be more. There should be more criticism of work. Like we go back to it. Like I said, I try to publish all the code that I write because I think it's important to kind of make it publicly accessible. And I'm pretty certain no one's ever read any of my code. And maybe there's stuff wrong there that needs to be checked, but nobody has ever checked it,
You're going to be like a Greek philosopher where in 2,000 years' time, AI specialists are going to go, that guy look at his code that he was writing on the edge of AI.
But the thing is, like, the worst case scenario is that like 20 years from now, somebody looks at my code and says, your life work is meaningless, right? That could happen. Yeah. And if someone had just like looked at my code 5 years ago, I would have corrected it by now, right? But that's kind of the point, right? Why should I be afraid of somebody looking at my code and going, oh, that's wrong, right? I should welcome it because it means that the next paper I publish is better because of that. But which is just embarrassing. So if anybody at home,
the steps to success are mistakes.
Yeah. So if anybody at home wants to look through my code, feel free because there's plenty of mistakes there, I'm sure, plenty to be picked at. So there you go.
Robert, you've taken us to a lovely natural place to end this episode. What I would ask you to do is, could you share with the audience where people can maybe find your work or read your papers? Where would be a good place to start?
That's a good point. So the paper I've been discussing today is not still published. I've just sent it off to Antiquity. It's not guaranteed they'll accept it because it's a bit of a weird paper, obviously. So I'm hoping to have that out within the next year. So it's not publicly available as of yet, unfortunately. Previous work, I've discussed some of my Malta work on this podcast before, so I think that's probably a place to start, I would say. I don't really have. I now have a blue sky. Let me check what my blue sky is because I keep forgetting. It's a new
an email address so anybody can email you questions, perhaps, Robert.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. So my blue sky is robbarratt.bluesky. At robbarratt.bsky. something. I can't actually see what it says. Hopefully that's enough for you to get it. My email address is robbarratt1@outlook.com. That's my personal email address. You're welcome to email me any questions there. Happy to answer any hate mail. That's like I retracted everyone's ire. That's fine. Send it my way. I'll delete it.
I don't think you're going to get any, and here's why. We live in a kind of a I don't know if you accept this or not, but I believe we live in a post-truth era where from everything from algorithms to the publisher perish, the pressure to make change affects academia and creators all over the world. And I think the conversation you've just given the audience we've just had is refreshing in the sense that while everybody no longer has opinions, they have answers. I have my answer. It's 100% right, or you're wrong. You seem to be projecting that you're quite happy to be wrong. And there's not many people out there that are openly say that.
Yeah. I'll go further to that. I'll say that I'm definitely wrong. This is the point. That's the whole point of it. I'm not just happy. I just know I am. I just haven't been called out yet. That's the problem.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's, again, science is a discourse, and I'm openly criticizing people because I think it's correct to criticize work that I think could be improved, and I think that I welcome it, and I think that everyone should be open to it. So if anybody genuinely looks for any of my papers and I was saying criticism, responses, like by all means, like publish away, call me out for it, because that's important. It doesn't matter. It's the way we grow as researchers.
Yeah. What you're doing there with this new paper is you're not providing answers to anything new. What you're doing is you're putting an academic cat amongst the pigeons.
Yeah.
Putting a grey cloud over everything that's come before, as in, is this all really as accurate as it claims? Because if the Barcelona McDonald's or the Stonehenge paradox effect is in there, you could be looking up to anything as much as half of what's been published about archaeoastronomy being wrong, and I choose half carefully.
But and that's fine. And the point is, like, it's not, as I said, it's not, I'm not trying to say let's stop doing archaeoastronomy. I'm just saying let's try doing it better. That's all I'm saying, you know.
Totally.
And what I said is better. Yeah, what I'm seeing is better may not be the correct way of doing it, but at least it makes you think of, are we doing the best we can? And I don't think we are. So what should we do better? And it's up to you to kind of work it out and improve your own work with it, you know?
Yeah. There's an argument with simple aspects, even such as cardinality, whereby so many people will come on and tell me about a temple alignment that is precisely east to west to within less of a degree of accuracy. And what I have a default argument, and it really juxtaposes it, because I say, how do you know that it's not aligned north to south to less than 1/2 a degree of accuracy, and the east to west is axiomatic?
Yeah.
And there's no answer to that, because if you get something cardinal, you can't say it's definitely that. They might have plumb to the pole star, which was much more important than the right setting equinox sun, say.
Well, that's exactly it. And again, this applies not just to archaeoastronomy. Any research you do, just think about what you're doing. Think of how you're doing this and do better. Always do better.
Robert, thank you so much from me and the audience for this. It's been great having you on, and we'll see you back on soon.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me.